For 20 years, my husband Paul called me his live-in maid. He mocked my housework, laughed that I couldn't even scrub a sink properly, and once forgot my birthday while buying jewelry for another woman. When I caught him in Manchester, hand in hand with her, I didn't scream or throw dishes. I went home, sat at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., and made a calm decision that would leave Paul with a toothbrush phobia for the rest of his life. My name is Claire, and I'm 47 years old. The discovery happened on a Tuesday evening when the November rain hammered against our Leeds kitchen windows. Paul was upstairs getting ready for what he called his overnight conference in Manchester, the same conference he'd attended 3 times in 2 months. The radiator clanged its familiar tune while I folded his shirts, a ritual I'd performed thousands of times without question. Until that night, when I noticed he'd packed only 1 shirt and a tie for an overnight business trip. Let me paint you a picture of my 20-year marriage to Paul Henderson, a man who believed household chores came with chromosomes. Paul's philosophy was carved in stone. Men don't do housework. Not just an opinion, mind you, a fundamental law of his universe. While I balanced full-time work as an accountant with every domestic responsibility, Paul mastered the art of selective blindness. He could spot a football score from 3 rooms away, but somehow missed the overflowing garbage bin he walked past every morning. His favorite dinner party joke? I married a live-in maid. Best decision of my life. The guests would laugh politely while I smiled and served dessert, my face burning with humiliation. 20 years of that same joke, and it never got funnier. The micro-humiliations built up like sediment in a riverbed. Can't you even scrub properly? Look at those streaks on the sink. I earn the money, you do the rest. That's the deal. You should be grateful you don't have kids. You can't even manage the house right. When our bathroom tap started leaking last spring, I watched Paul settle into his armchair with a beer while I crawled under the sink with a wrench and a YouTube tutorial. Good luck with that, he'd called out cheerfully, as if fixing household problems was some sort of entertaining hobby I'd chosen. The restaurant bills started appearing in July, receipts for 2 people at places I'd never been, tucked carelessly into his jacket pockets. When I asked about them, Paul had explanations smoother than single malt: client dinner, business lunch, conference networking. Each excuse delivered with the confidence of a man who'd never been questioned about anything more serious than his toast preference. Then came the cologne. Paul had worn the same aftershave for 15 years, a woody, familiar scent I could identify from across the room, but suddenly, in September, he started coming home smelling like something expensive and floral, mixed with an unfamiliar perfume that definitely wasn't mine. When I mentioned it, he claimed his new office manager wore a lot of perfume and it stuck to everyone's clothes. Right, because that's exactly how scent molecules work. The breaking point arrived through our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, a 70-something woman with the observational skills of a private investigator and the gossip network of a small-town newspaper. She caught me bringing in the groceries on a dreary October afternoon, rain dripping from my umbrella onto the front steps. "Claire, love," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for delivering uncomfortable truths. "I saw Paul's car yesterday outside the Premier Hotel on the A61. Didn't look very businesslike, if you know what I mean." My heart performed an impressive gymnastics routine in my chest. "Business meeting," I managed, the words tasting like ash. Mrs. Patterson's knowing look could have melted steel. "Of course, dear. Just thought you should know." That night, Paul announced his upcoming Manchester conference with the enthusiasm of a man planning a romantic getaway, which unfortunately for him was exactly what he was doing. "Overnight conference in Manchester," he declared, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. "Important client presentation. Won't be back until Thursday evening." I nodded and smiled. The perfect supportive wife. Inside, my detective instincts were sharpening like kitchen knives. Wednesday morning, after Paul left with his suspiciously light overnight bag, I did something I'd never done in 20 years of marriage. I took a personal day from work and bought a bus ticket to Manchester. The 2-hour journey gave me plenty of time to question my sanity. What kind of person follows their husband to check on their faithfulness? But then I remembered the restaurant receipts, the mysterious cologne, the jewelry box hidden in his desk drawer, a box I'd found while looking for stamps, containing a delicate silver necklace I'd never seen on my neck. Manchester city centre buzzed with its usual mix of business people and tourists. I found a cafe across from the Premier Hotel and ordered tea, settling in to wait like a private investigator in a budget crime novel. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 20 years of being treated like the help, I was finally doing some actual detective work. At 2:30 p.m., Paul emerged from the hotel's revolving doors, with a woman who definitely wasn't a business client. She was younger than me, probably early 30s, with glossy hair and the kind of confident stride that comes from never having scrubbed bathroom tiles at midnight. Paul held her hand with the tenderness he'd stopped showing me years ago, opening doors and laughing at whatever witty observation she'd made. They walked to Luigi's, an Italian restaurant I'd suggested for our anniversary 3 years running. Paul had always dismissed it as too fancy and overpriced. Apparently, it was just too fancy for me. I followed at a distance, feeling simultaneously like a skilled spy and a pathetic wife. They chose a window table. How thoughtful of them, where I could photograph everything with my phone from across the street. Paul ordered wine, something he claimed gave him headaches when I suggested romantic dinners. They touched hands across the table. They shared dessert. They looked like a couple celebrating an anniversary, which, in a twisted way, they probably were. But the moment that crystallized my rage into cold determination happened during their coffee course. Paul reached into his jacket and produced a small jewelry box, the same box I'd found in his desk. The woman's face lit up as she opened it, revealing the silver necklace that should have been hanging around my neck. She fastened it around her throat while Paul watched with the expression he'd worn when we first met 25 years ago. Pure adoration. The look he'd stopped giving me sometime around year 3 when I'd transformed from girlfriend to household manager. I sat in that Manchester cafe watching my husband give another woman the romantic attention he'd withheld from me for decades, and something inside me shifted. Not broke, shifted, like a gear clicking into a different position. The bus ride home passed in a strange calm. No tears, no dramatic internal monologue, no plans for screaming confrontations, just a quiet mathematical assessment of my situation. 20 years of marriage to a man who treated me like unpaid domestic staff. 20 years of jokes about being his live-in maid. 20 years of forgotten birthdays, dismissed opinions, and restaurant dinners with other women. The numbers added up to a simple conclusion. I was done being useful. I arrived home to our empty house at 9:47 p.m., the silence more welcoming than it had been in years. No Paul commentary about dinner preparations, no requests to iron shirts or find missing socks, just the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling floorboards. I made tea, proper tea, in my favorite mug, the one Paul always claimed was too small for a decent cup, Earl Grey with honey, because I could. Then I sat at our kitchen table, the same table where I'd balanced checkbooks, planned grocery lists, and absorbed 20 years of casual disrespect. At exactly 3:15 a.m., while the rest of Leeds slept peacefully, I opened my laptop and made the decision that would transform Paul Henderson from a cheating husband into a local legend. The A61 Billboard advertising space cost $520 for 1 week. Not exactly pocket change for most people, but I'd been quietly saving money from our household budget for 3 years. £20 here, 15 there, money Paul never missed because he'd never bothered to look at our actual expenses. My secret fund had grown to $1,347, originally intended for a surprise anniversary trip to Italy. Well, this would certainly be surprising. The Billboard company's website made the process surprisingly simple. Choose your location, prime morning commute visibility. Upload your design, pay online, and wait for approval. They promised installation within 48 hours for standard text layouts. I spent 45 minutes crafting the perfect message, nothing hysterical or unhinged that would only make me look like the emotional wife having a breakdown. No, this needed surgical precision, maximum humiliation with minimal words. The final design was beautiful in its simplicity. To my cheating husband, Paul. I may have cleaned the house for 20 years all by myself, but at least I taught you one thing. P.S. Your toothbrush cleans toilets perfectly. While my computer processed the payment, I walked upstairs to our ensuite bathroom. Paul's electric toothbrush sat in its charging dock, blue and pristine, the same toothbrush he'd used religiously twice daily for the past 5 years. He was obsessively particular about dental hygiene, one of the few household tasks he managed entirely himself. I picked up that toothbrush and carried it to the toilet. What happened next took approximately 30 seconds and cost me nothing but a few minutes of hand washing afterward. Let's just say Paul's toothbrush got intimately acquainted with some very unsanitary surfaces before being carefully rinsed, dried, and returned to its charging dock. The beauty of the plan wasn't the gross factor, though that certainly had its appeal. It was the psychological warfare. Paul would brush his teeth twice daily for the next week, completely unaware of his toothbrush's recent adventure. But after the Billboard went live and people started asking questions, every brushing session would become a source of paranoid anxiety. Had I done something to it? When? How long had he been using a compromised toothbrush? The uncertainty would eat at him far more effectively than any screaming match. I left a note on the bathroom counter, written in my neatest handwriting, "Paul, don't try to find me. You'll understand soon enough." C. By 4:30 a.m., I had packed 2 suitcases and loaded my car. The Billboard would go live Friday morning, giving me 48 hours to establish an alibi elsewhere. My mother lived in Harrogate, barely an hour away, and she'd been asking me to visit for months. The drive to Mum's house felt like traveling through time. With each mile between me and Leeds, I felt layers of accumulated resentment peeling away. No one expected me to arrive with dinner prepared, laundry folded, or solutions to problems I didn't create. My mother, bless her, took one look at my face and put the kettle on without asking questions. Dorothy Richardson had raised 3 children, survived 47 years of marriage to my father, and developed an uncanny ability to read domestic disasters. "Paul?" she asked simply, settling into her favorite armchair with her morning tea. "Paul," I confirmed. "Another woman?" "Another woman." She nodded as if this explained everything, which, unfortunately for Paul, it did. Thursday passed quietly. I helped Mum with her garden, cooked lunch for 2 instead of rushing home to prepare dinner for an ungrateful husband, and felt my shoulders relax for the first time in months. We watched afternoon television, gossiped about the neighbors, and I remembered what it felt like to exist as something other than Paul's domestic support system. My phone buzzed occasionally, text messages from Paul asking where I was, why I'd left, when I was coming home. I read them without responding, watching his tone evolve from confusion to irritation to genuine concern. By Thursday evening, he was calling every hour. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable sunshine and the promise of entertainment. The Billboard went live at exactly 6 a.m., positioned perfectly for maximum visibility during the morning commute. I'd calculated the timing precisely. Paul left for work at 7:45 a.m., meaning he'd see his public humiliation just as thousands of other commuters were taking photos and sharing them on social media. At 8:17 a.m., my phone exploded. Paul's first call lasted 30 seconds of incoherent sputtering before he hung up. The second call was more articulate but significantly less calm. "Claire, what the hell have you done? There's a bloody billboard with my name on it. People are taking pictures. My colleagues saw it. This is insane." I let it go to voicemail. His text messages became increasingly frantic. "Call me now. This is harassment. People at work are laughing at me. What toothbrush? What are you talking about?" That last message made me smile. The psychological torture was working exactly as planned. By noon, Billboard wife was trending on Twitter. Someone had photographed my billboard and shared it with the caption, "Somewhere in Leeds, a woman has achieved peak revenge." The post received 15,000 retweets in 6 hours. Local news stations picked up the story. Radio DJs debated whether my actions were justified or cruel. The Yorkshire Post ran an article titled, "Mystery Billboard Wife Sparks Debate About Public Shaming." Paul's workplace became ground zero for the city's entertainment. His colleagues, who'd endured 20 years of his live-in maid jokes, suddenly found the situation considerably less amusing when the tables turned. Every meeting, every coffee break, every interaction became an opportunity for someone to ask about his domestic situation. The beauty of going viral in the digital age is the complete loss of control. Paul couldn't take down the billboard. I'd paid for the full week. He couldn't stop people from sharing photos online. He couldn't escape to work without passing at least 3 more billboards on alternative routes. Yes, I'd researched his commute options thoroughly. His Friday evening call was different, quieter, almost pleading. "Claire, please. This has gone too far. People are staring at me everywhere. My boss asked if I needed personal time to sort out my marital issues. The receptionist won't make eye contact. Just come home. We can talk about this like adults." Like adults. After 20 years of treating me like unpaid help, Paul wanted to discuss our relationship like adults. I let that one go to voicemail too. Saturday morning brought a development I hadn't anticipated: breakfast television. "Good morning, I'm Sarah Mitchell from BBC Leeds," the reporter announced from directly in front of my billboard. The mysterious Billboard wife story has captured the nation's attention, sparking debates about public shaming, marital revenge, and the limits of acceptable retaliation. I nearly choked on my tea. Mum, who'd been following the story with the dedication of a sports fan, turned up the volume with obvious glee. The billboard, which cost an estimated $520 for 1 week's display, has generated millions of pounds worth of free publicity, the reporter continued. Social media experts estimate the hashtag #OneBillboardWife has reached over 12 million people across various platforms. The segment interviewed random commuters, and their responses ranged from supportive, good for her, to concerned, seems a bit public, doesn't it, to absolutely delighted. I drive past this every day now just to see if it's still there. But the piece de resistance came when they interviewed relationship experts. Dr. Amanda Foster from Leeds University appeared via video link, looking appropriately serious in her academic blazer. "What we're seeing here," Dr. Foster explained, "is the result of accumulated microaggressions in a relationship. The wife clearly felt unheard through traditional communication channels, so she opted for a very public form of expression. Microaggressions. There was a term for Paul's 20-year campaign of casual disrespect. The BBC segment concluded with a tantalizing promise. "We'll continue following this story as it develops. The identity of the Billboard wife remains unknown, but sources suggest she may soon break her silence." Sources suggest? I was sitting in my mother's living room in my pajamas, eating toast. What sources? My phone had been buzzing constantly since Friday evening. Journalists somehow tracking down my number, requesting interviews, offering money for my exclusive story. I turned it to silent after the 15th call, but the notifications kept lighting up the screen like a Christmas tree. Paul's weekend strategy became clear through his increasingly desperate voicemails. If he couldn't stop the story, he'd try to control the narrative. Saturday afternoon's message. "Claire, I know you're angry, but this is destroying my reputation. My mother saw it on the news. My mother. She's asking questions I can't answer because you won't talk to me." Ah, yes, Paul's mother, Patricia Henderson, a woman who'd spent 30 years treating me like her son's unfortunate life choice rather than his wife. The same woman who still introduced me as Paul's friend Claire at family gatherings despite 2 decades of marriage certificates and shared surnames. Saturday evening's message revealed his new tactic. "Look, I know I haven't been perfect. Maybe we both made mistakes. but this public humiliation isn't solving anything. Come home and we'll go to counseling. We can work this out like civilized people." Civilized people. From the man who'd spent 20 years making live-in maid jokes at dinner parties. Sunday brought the story's most entertaining development: Paul's attempted PR campaign. Someone, almost certainly Paul himself, had created a Facebook post from his account, trying to present his side of the story. The post, which appeared around 2 p.m., was a masterpiece of damage control that backfired spectacularly. Friends and family, you may have seen some disturbing content about me recently. I want you to know that every marriage has its challenges, and Claire and I are working through ours privately. The Billboard situation is unfortunate, but I believe it stems from a misunderstanding that we can resolve with time and professional help. I ask for your patience and privacy during this difficult time. Paul. The comments section became a battlefield within minutes. Sarah, Paul's colleague. Misunderstanding. Mate, what's misunderstood about cheating? Dave, neighbor. Saw you with that woman at Luigi's last month. Claire deserves better. Margaret, Paul's own aunt. 20 years of marriage and you call it a misunderstanding. Your father would be ashamed. But my personal favorite came from Mrs. Patterson, our observant neighbor. Paul Henderson. I've watched you treat that lovely woman like unpaid help for 2 decades. The only misunderstanding here is how long she put up with it. Paul deleted the post within 6 hours, but screenshots live forever on the internet. The damage was done, and his attempt at controlling the narrative had only amplified the story. Monday morning brought my favorite development: workplace consequences. Paul worked at Henderson & Associates, no relation despite the shared surname, a coincidence he'd always found amusing. The accounting firm prided itself on discretion, professionalism, and family values. Having one of their senior associates become the face of a viral adultery scandal wasn't exactly on brand. According to my sources, Paul's frantic voicemails, his Monday morning was spectacular. Claire, they've moved my office. Apparently, clients were calling asking about the Billboard husband. Janet from HR says it's temporary, but they've put me in the basement next to the copy machine. The basement, Claire, and everyone keeps asking about the bloody toothbrush. The toothbrush question was driving him absolutely mad, exactly as planned. The genius of that particular detail was its vagueness. People's imaginations ran wild with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Some online theories suggested food poisoning, others proposed more creative hygiene violations. The truth was simultaneously more and less dramatic than people imagined, but Paul didn't know that. His Tuesday evening call revealed the psychological torture was working perfectly. I've thrown out 4 toothbrushes since Friday. 4. I keep imagining things. I can't brush my teeth without wondering what you did. This is mental torture, Claire. Actual mental torture. Mission accomplished. But the real entertainment came Wednesday evening when Paul attempted his most desperate move yet, showing up at my mother's house. I was helping Mom with her evening crossword when the doorbell rang at 7:30 p.m. Through the front window, I could see Paul's BMW parked at the curb, the same car he'd driven to his Manchester rendezvous. "I'll handle this," Mom announced, rising from her chair with the determination of a woman who'd raised children through tantrums, teenagers through rebellion, and one daughter through a disappointing marriage. She opened the door to Paul's most charming smile, the one he used on waitresses, shop assistants, and apparently women who weren't his wife. "Mrs. Richardson, lovely to see you," Paul began. "Is Claire available? We really need to talk about this situation." "No," Mom interrupted with the finality of a judge's gavel. "I'm sorry? No, she's not available. No, you can't come in. And no, I won't pass along your messages." Paul's charm offensive crumbled like a poorly constructed souffle. "Look, this has gone far enough. That billboard is ruining my life. People are laughing at me everywhere I go. My own colleagues won't make eye contact. This is harassment." "Good," Mom replied cheerfully. "Perhaps 20 years too late, but good nonetheless. You can't be serious. She's your daughter. Exactly. My daughter, who spent 2 decades being treated like unpaid help by a man who should have been grateful for her patience. The conversation continued for another 5 minutes, but Mum held her ground like a fortress. Paul left empty-handed, his BMW disappearing into the evening, while I watched from behind the living room curtains, feeling simultaneously protected and empowered. Thursday brought the phone call that would change everything. A producer from Good Morning Britain offering me $5,000 for an exclusive interview. £5,000, more than 9 times what I'd spent on the Billboard. After 20 years of being financially dependent on a man who treated me like hired help, the irony was delicious. My revenge wasn't just satisfying, it was profitable. "We'd love to hear your side of the story," the producer explained. "The nation is fascinated by the Billboard wife. This is your chance to control the narrative." Control the narrative. After years of Paul dismissing my opinions, minimizing my contributions, and treating my voice as background noise, I finally had a platform where millions would listen. I accepted the interview. Friday morning, 8:30 a.m. Good morning. Britain's London studio felt surreal after a week in my mother's quiet Harrogate sitting room. Professional makeup, studio lighting, and the knowledge that 3 million people would watch me speak. It was intoxicating after 20 years of having my voice dismissed as background noise. Susanna Reid, the show's presenter, had that perfect television combination of warmth and sharp intelligence. During our pre-interview chat, she'd assured me the questions would be fair but thorough. "The nation wants to understand your story," she'd explained. "This has become bigger than just one marriage. It sparked conversations about respect, equality, and how we treat each other in relationships." The interview began with Susanna introducing me simply as Claire, my surname withheld for privacy, though half of Leeds probably knew exactly who I was by now. "Claire, you've become known as the Billboard wife after putting up a very public message about your husband's infidelity. Tell us why you chose such a dramatic approach." I'd practiced this answer, but sitting under those bright lights facing millions of viewers, the words came naturally. For 20 years, I tried traditional communication. I expressed my feelings, voiced my concerns, asked for respect and consideration. But when someone treats you like hired help rather than a partner, eventually you realize that quiet conversations aren't working. "The Billboard certainly got his attention," Susanna observed with a slight smile. "It got everyone's attention, which was rather the point." The interview continued for 12 minutes, covering my marriage, the microaggressions, the Manchester discovery, and my decision to go public. But the moment that would be replayed on every news program for the next week came when Susanna asked about the toothbrush reference. "Now, Claire, the Billboard mentions your husband's toothbrush cleaning toilets perfectly. Can you clarify what that means?" I paused for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to build tension, short enough to maintain momentum, the pause that would launch 1,000 memes. Let's just say that for 1 week, Paul brushed his teeth with more than just toothpaste. Sometimes the most effective lessons come from experiencing consequences rather than hearing explanations. Paul spent 20 years treating me like his personal cleaning service. I thought he might appreciate a more intimate understanding of cleanliness standards. The studio audience's collective gasp was audible even through the television. Pure television gold. The revelation sent the internet into absolute chaos. Within minutes of the segment airing, seeing toothbrush revenge was trending worldwide. Memes flooded social media. Comedy shows wrote entire segments about it. The story jumped from regional news to international entertainment. But more importantly, it crystallized exactly why my revenge had been so perfectly calibrated. Paul had spent 2 decades dismissing my domestic labor as worthless, treating housework as beneath his dignity. Making him unknowingly intimate with the bathroom facilities he'd never cleaned seemed like poetic justice. Paul's response came within hours of the broadcast, but not in the way I expected. Instead of the usual frantic phone calls, he showed up at the Good Morning Britain studios. Security called me while I was still in the green room, removing my television makeup. "Mrs. Claire? Your husband is in reception, demanding to speak with you. He's quite agitated. Would you like us to escort you out through a different exit?" The old Claire, the Claire who'd spent 20 years smoothing over Paul's embarrassments, managing his emotions, protecting his feelings, would have slipped out the back door to avoid confrontation. The new Claire? She walked straight to reception. Paul stood near the security desk, still handsome in that way that had attracted me 25 years ago, but now looking hollow around the edges. Stress had carved lines around his eyes, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. The past week had aged him considerably. "Claire." His voice was quieter than I'd heard it in years. "We need to talk." "No, Paul. We needed to talk 20 years ago. We needed to talk when you started treating me like your personal servant. We needed to talk when you forgot my birthday to buy jewelry for someone else. But you weren't interested in talking then." The reception area had gone completely silent. Receptionists pretended to work while obviously listening. Security guards positioned themselves strategically. Even the cleaning staff had found reasons to linger nearby. "I know I made mistakes," Paul continued, his charm offensive in full swing. "But publicly humiliating me isn't the answer. That interview, telling everyone about the toothbrush, this has destroyed my reputation permanently." "Good." The simple word hung in the air like a dropped microphone. "Good?" Paul's composure finally cracked. "How is destroying my career, my social life, my relationship with my family good? Because for 20 years, you systematically destroyed my self-respect, my confidence, and my sense of worth. You treated me like unpaid help while joking about it at dinner parties. You made me feel invisible in my own marriage while conducting a very visible affair." "So now we're even?" Paul asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "No, Paul. Now we're done." I walked past him toward the exit, feeling lighter with each step. Behind me, I heard him calling my name, but for the first time in 2 decades, I didn't stop, didn't turn around, didn't manage his emotions or smooth over his distress. The divorce papers were signed on a Tuesday morning in February, exactly 6 months after the Billboard went live. Paul had to sell the house to pay the settlement. Apparently, viral adultery scandals don't help with property negotiations or legal proceedings. I used my portion of the house sale, combined with the interview fees, Good Morning Britain led to several other media appearances, to buy a small cottage in the Cotswolds. 2 bedrooms, a garden that blooms with flowers I actually have time to enjoy, and complete silence except for birds and the occasional sheep. Paul, according to mutual acquaintances, moved to Manchester to be closer to his girlfriend, the same woman from the restaurant. Henderson and Associates apparently decided his personal brand challenges made him unsuitable for client-facing roles, so he took a position with significantly less visibility and considerably less pay. The toothbrush paranoia, I'm told, lasted for months. He reportedly went through 17 different toothbrushes and briefly considered switching to mouthwash exclusively before finally seeking therapy. My new life is remarkably quiet after 6 months of internet fame. I wake up when I want, eat meals I've chosen, and spend my evenings reading books instead of ironing shirts for a man who never said thank you. The cottage came with a small art studio that the previous owner had built for pottery. I'd always wanted to try ceramics, something Paul had dismissed as messy and impractical whenever I mentioned it. Now I spend Tuesday evenings with clay and a pottery wheel, creating imperfect bowls and wonky vases that bring me more satisfaction than 20 years of perfectly ironed shirts ever did. The garden has become my greatest joy, planting flowers, growing vegetables, creating something beautiful with my hands, work that Paul would have seen as pointless because it didn't directly serve him. But watching tomatoes grow from seeds I planted, cutting fresh herbs for dinners I cook for myself, these small acts feel revolutionary after decades of being taken for granted. Mrs. Patterson visits occasionally, bringing news from Leeds and genuine friendship. She was right about that day she mentioned Paul's car at the hotel. Sometimes the people watching from their windows see more clearly than the people living inside the house. My mother comes for Sunday lunch every week, delighting in her daughter's transformation from doormat to internet legend. She started telling the story at her bridge club with obvious pride. "My Claire is the Billboard wife, you know. Showed that useless husband of hers what's what." The media attention has finally died down, though I still get occasional interview requests for articles about life after viral revenge. I've turned them all down. My story was never really about Paul or billboards or toothbrushes. It was about remembering that being useful to someone doesn't make you valuable to them, and that respect isn't earned through service. Last week, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. Paul's handwriting, which I'd recognize anywhere after 20 years of reading shopping lists and reminder notes. "Claire, I know you probably won't read this, but I need you to know that I understand now what I lost. Not just the marriage, but your respect, your trust, and the woman I fell in love with 25 years ago. I treated you terribly, and I'm sorry. I hope you're happy wherever you are. P." I read it once, then used it to start the fire in my cottage fireplace. Not out of anger or spite, but because some chapters of life are meant to end, and the most loving thing you can do for both people is to let them end completely. The billboard came down after its paid week, but screenshots live forever on the internet. Occasionally, I'll see it shared on social media with captions like "goals" or "queen behavior" or "this is how you handle a cheater." I don't think of myself as a queen or a goal, just a woman who finally learned the difference between being good and being valued. For 20 years, I was a very good wife. Accommodating, helpful, reliable, endlessly forgiving. But good doesn't automatically equal valued, and useful doesn't automatically mean respected. These days, my biggest decision is whether to plant roses or lavender in the front garden border. My most pressing deadline is finishing a pottery project by next Tuesday's class. My most important relationship is the one I'm rebuilding with myself. I spent 2 decades being Paul Henderson's live-in maid. Now I'm just Claire, potter, gardener, cottage owner, and woman who learned that sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to be useful to people who don't value you. And that, dear readers, is how $520 and a toothbrush bought back 20 years of my life. What would you have done if you found out your partner was cheating? Comment below and let me know what you think about standing up for yourself when someone has taken you for granted. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to remember their worth. Sometimes we all need reminding that being indispensable to someone doesn't make us valuable to them. It just makes us convenient.